Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again here in Somnium for another reading stream. We left off finishing up The Snow Queen by Hans Andersen, and now we will pick up with The Nightingale, also by Hans Andersen. You'll be able to find the collection of these reading streams in our playlist of Mira's Cozy Readings. And I hope that you'll be able to enjoy these whether you need them as background noise or to help aid in a gentle rest. We only do a brief bit of chatting in the beginning so that those who are strictly here just to hear readings don't have to forward too much in the video. So please cuddle up and get cozy. Grab your blanket, your warm beverage of choice, and allow yourself to relax to the sound of my voice and our reading this evening. I also wanted to note that sometimes our closed captions are not always accurate. So I apologize for anyone who is utilizing the closed captions that we have. And I hope that you're still able to decipher with hearing as well if you are able to the narrative of the story. So without further ado, let us begin. Again, we'll be reading The Nightingale by Hans Andersen. The Nightingale. In China, as you know, the emperor is a Chinaman, and all the people around him are Chinamen too. It is many years since the story I am going to tell you happened, but that is all the more reason for telling it, lest it should be forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most beautiful thing in the world. It was made entirely of the finest porcelain, very costly, but at the same time so fragile that it could only be touched with the very greatest care. There were the most extraordinary flowers to be seen in the garden. The most beautiful ones had little silver bells tied to them, which tinkled perpetually, so that one should not pass the flowers without looking at them. Every little detail in the garden had been most carefully thought out, and it was so big that even the gardener himself did not know where it ended. If one went out on walking, One came to beautiful woods with lofty trees and deep lakes. The wood extended to the sea, which was deep and blue, deep enough for large ships to sail up right under the branches of the trees. Among these trees lived a nightingale, which sang so deliciously that even the poor fisherman, who had plenty of other things to do, lay still to listen when he was out at night drawing in his nets. "Heavens, how beautiful it is," he said. But then he had to attend to his business and forgot. The next night, when he heard it again, he would again exclaim, "Heavens, how beautiful it is." Travelers came to the emperor's capital from every country in the world. They admired everything very much, especially the palace and the gardens. But when they heard the nightingale, they all said, "This is better than anything." When they got home, they described it, and the learned ones wrote many books about the town, the palace, and the garden. But nobody forgot the nightingale. It was always put above everything else. Those among them who were poets wrote the most beautiful poems, all about the nightingale in the woods by the deep blue sea. These books went all over the world, and in course of time, some of them reached the emperor. He sat in his garden chair, reading and nodding his head, well pleased to hear such beautiful descriptions of the town, the palace, and the garden. "But the nightingale is the best of all," he read. "What is this?" said the emperor. "The nightingale? Why, I know nothing about it. Is there such a bird in my kingdom, and in my very own garden in the bargain? And I have never," bad page turn area, "and I have never heard of it. Imagine my having to discover this from a book." Then he called his gentleman in waiting, who was so grand that when any one of the lower rank dared to speak to him, or to ask him a question, he would only answer, "He," which means nothing at all. "There is said to be a very wonderful bird called a nightingale here," said the emperor. "They say that it is better than anything else in all my great kingdom. Why have I never been told anything about it?" "I have never heard it mentioned," said the gentleman in waiting. "It has never been presented at court." "I wish it to appear here this evening to sing to me," said the emperor. "The whole world knows what I am possessed of, and I know nothing about it." "I have never heard it mentioned before," said the gentleman in waiting. "I will seek it, and I will find it." But where was it to be found? The gentleman in waiting ran upstairs and downstairs and in and out of all the rooms and corridors. No one of all those he met had ever heard anything about the nightingale. So the gentleman in waiting ran back to the emperor and said that it must be a myth invented by the writers of the books. "Your imperial majesty must not believe everything that is written. Books are often mere inventions, even if they do not belong to what we call the black art." "But the book in which I read it is sent to me by the powerful emperor of Japan, so it can't be untrue." "I will hear this nightingale. I insist upon it being here tonight." I extend my most gracious protection to it, and if it is not forthcoming, I will have the whole court trampled upon after supper. Sai Pi, said the gentleman in waiting, and ran away he again, up and down all the stairs, in and out of all the rooms and corridors. Half the court ran with him, for they none of them wished to be trampled on. There was much questioning about the nightingale, which was known to all the outside world, but to no one at court. At last they found a poor little maid in the kitchen. She said, "Oh heavens, the nightingale! I know it very well. Yes, indeed, it can sing. Every evening I am allowed to take broken meat to my poor sick mother. She lives down by the shore. On my way back, when I am tired, I rest a while in the wood, and then I hear the nightingale. Its song brings tears into my eyes. I feel as if my mother were kissing me." "Little kitchen maid," said the gentleman in waiting, "I will procure you a permanent position in the kitchen and permission to see the emperor dining, if you will take us to the nightingale. It is commanded to appear at court tonight." Then they all went out into the wood, where the nightingale usually sang. Half the court was there. As they were going along at their best pace, a cow began to bellow. "Oh," said the young courtier, "there we have it. What wonderful power for such a little creature. I have certainly heard it before." "No, those are the cows bellowing. We are a very long way yet from the place." Then the frogs began to croak in the marsh. "Beautiful," said the Chinese chaplain. "It is just like the tinkling of church bells." "No, those are the frogs," said the little kitchen maid, "but I think we shall soon hear it now." "There it is," said the little girl. "Listen, listen, there it sits." And she pointed to a little gray bird up along the branches. "Is it possible?" said the gentleman in waiting. "I should never have thought it was like that. How common it looks. Seeing so many grand people must have frightened all its color away." "Little nightingale," called the kitchen maid quite loud, "our gracious emperor wishes you to sing to him." "With the greatest of pleasure," said the nightingale, warbling away in the most delightful fashion. "It is just like a crystal bell," said the gentleman in waiting. "Look at its little throat, how active it is. It is extraordinary that we have never heard it before. I am sure it will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing again to the emperor?" said the nightingale, who thought he was present. "My precious little nightingale," said the gentleman in waiting, "I have the honor to command your attendance at court festival tonight, where you will charm His Gracious Majesty the Emperor with your fascinating singing." "It sounds best among the trees," said the nightingale, but it went with them willingly when it heard that the Emperor wished it. The palace had been brightened up for the occasion. The walls and the floors, which were all of china, shone by the light of many thousand golden lamps. The most beautiful flowers, all of the tinkling kind, were arranged in the corridors, There was hurry to and fro. Sorry. There was hurrying to and fro, and a great draught, but this was just what made the bells ring. One's ears were full of the tinkling. In the middle of the large reception room, where the emperor sat, a golden rod had been fixed, on which the nightingale was to perch. The whole court was assembled, and the little kitchen maid had been permitted to stand behind the door, as she now had the actual title of cook. They were all dressed in their best. Everybody's eyes were turned towards the little gray bird at which the emperor was nodding. The nightingale sang delightfully, and the tears came into the emperor's eyes. Nay, they rolled down his cheeks. And then the nightingale sang more beautifully than ever. Its notes touched all hearts. The emperor was charmed, and said the nightingale should have his gold slipper to wear around its neck. But the nightingale declined with thanks. It had already been sufficiently rewarded. I have seen tears in the eyes of the emperor. That is my richest reward. The tears of an emperor have a wonderful power. God knows I am sufficiently recompensated. And then it again burst into its sweet heavenly song. That is the most delightful coquetting I have ever seen. And the ladies, and they took some water into their mouths to try and make the same gurgling when anyone spoke to them, thinking so to equal the nightingale. Even the lackeys and the chambermaids announced that they were satisfied, and that is saying a great deal. They are always the most difficult people to please. Yes, indeed, the nightingale had made a sensation. It was to stay at court now, and to have its own cage, as well as liberty to walk out twice a day and once in the night. It always had 12 footmen, with each one holding a ribbon, which was tied around its leg. There was not much pleasure in an outing of that sort. The whole town talked about the marvelous bird, and if two people met, one said to the other, "Night," and the other answered, "Gale," and then they sighed, perfectly understanding each other. 11 cheesemonger children were called after it, but they had not got a voice among them. One day, a large parcel came for the emperor. Outside was written the word nightingale. "Here we have another new book about this celebrated bird," said the emperor. But it was no book. It was a little work of art in a box, an artificial nightingale, exactly like the living one, but it was studded all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When the bird was wound up, it could sing one of the songs the real one sang, and it wagged its tail, which glittered with silver and gold. A ribbon was tied round its neck, on which was written, "The Emperor of Japan's nightingale is very poor compared to the Emperor of China's." Everybody said, "Oh, how beautiful." And the person who brought the artificial bird immediately received the title of Imperial Nightingale Carrier in Chief. Now, they must sing together. What a duet that will be. Then they had to sing together, but they did not get on very well, for the real nightingale sang its own way, and the artificial one could only sing waltzes. "There is no fault in that," said the music master. "It is perfectly in time and correct in every way." Then the artificial bird had to sing alone. It was just as great a success as the real one, and then it was so much prettier to look at. It glittered like bracelets and breastpins. It sang the same tune 330 times over, and yet it was not tired. People would willingly have heard it from the beginning again, but the emperor said that the real one must have a turn now. But where is it? No one had noticed that it had flown out of the open window, back to its own green woods. "But what is the meaning of this?" said the emperor. All the courtiers railed at it and said it was the most ungrateful bird. "We have got the best bird, though," said they. And then the artificial bird had to sing again, and this was 34 times that they had heard the same tune, but they did not know it thoroughly enough because it was so difficult. The music master praised the bird tremendously and insisted that it was much better than the real nightingale, not only as regarded the outside with all the diamonds, but the inside too. Because, you see, my ladies and gentlemen, and the emperor before all, and the real nightingale, you never know what you will hear. But the artificial one, everything is decided beforehand. So it is, and so it must remain. It cannot be otherwise. You can account for things. You can open it and show the human ingenuity in arranging the waltzes, how they go, and how one note follows upon another. "Those are exactly my opinions," they all said, and the music master got leave to show the bird to the public next Sunday. They were also to hear it sing, said the emperor. So they heard it, and all became as enthusiastic over it as if they had drunk themselves merry on tea, because this is thoroughly Chinese habit. Then they all said, "Oh," and struck their forefingers in the air and nodded their heads. But the poor fisherman, who had heard the real nightingale, said, "It sounds very nice, and it is very like the real one, but there is something wanting. We don't know what." The real nightingale was banished from the kingdom. The artificial bird had its place on a silken cushion close to the emperor's bed. All the presents it had received of gold and precious jewels were scattered around. Its title had risen to Chief Imperial Singer of the Bedchamber, and rank number 1 on the left side, for the emperor reckoned that side the important one, where the heart was seated. And even an emperor's heart is on the left side. The music master wrote 25 volumes about the artificial bird. The treaties were very long and written in all the most difficult Chinese characters. Everybody said they had read it and understood it, for otherwise they would have been reckoned stupid, and then their bodies would have been trampled upon. Things went on in this way for a whole year. The emperor, the court, and all the other Chinamen knew every little gurgle in the song of the artificial bird by heart. But they liked it all the better for this, and they could all join in the song themselves. Even the street boys sang, "See, see, see," and "Cluck, cluck, cluck," and the emperor sang it too. But one evening, when the bird was singing its best, the emperor was lying in bed listening to it. Something gave way inside the bird with a whiz. Then a spring burst, whirl, went all over the wheels, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped out of bed and sent for his private physicians, but what good could they do? Then they sent for the watchmaker, and after a good deal of talk and examination, he got the works to go again somehow. But he said it would have to be saved as much as possible, because it was so worn out, and he could not renew the works so as to be sure of the tune. This was a great blow. They only dared to let the artificial bird sing once a year, and hardly that. But then the music master made a little speech, using all the most difficult words. He said it was just as good as ever, and his saying it made it so. 5 years now passed, and then a great grief came upon the nation, for they were all very fond of their emperor, and he was ill and could not live, it was said. A new emperor was already chosen, and people stood about in the street and asked the gentlemen in waiting how their emperor was going on. "P," answered he, shaking his head. The emperor lay pale and cold in his gorgeous bed. The courtiers thought he was dead, and they all went off to pay their respects to their new emperor. The lackeys ran off to talk matters over, and the chambermaids gave a great coffee party. Cloth had been laid down in all the rooms and corridors, so as to deaden the sound of footsteps, so it was very, very quiet. But the emperor was not yet dead. He lay stiff and pale in the gorgeous bed, with his velvet hangings and heavy golden tassels. There was an open window high above him, and the moon streamed in upon the emperor and the artificial bird beside him. The poor emperor could hardly breathe. He seemed to have a weight on his chest. He opened his eyes, and then he saw that it was Death sitting upon his chest, wearing his golden crown. In one hand he held the emperor's golden sword, and in the other his imperial banner. Round about, from among the folds of the velvet hangings, peered many curious faces. Some were hideous, others gentle and pleasant. They were all the emperor's good and bad deeds, which now looked him in the face when death was weighing him down. "Do you remember that?" whispered one after the other. "Do you remember this?" And they told him so many things that the perspiration poured down his face. "I never knew that," said the emperor. "Music, music, sound the great Chinese drums," he cried, "that I may not hear what they are saying." But they went on, and Death sat nodding his head, just like a Chinaman, and everything that was said. "Music, music," shrieked the emperor. "You precious little golden bird, sing, sing. I have loaded you with precious stones, and even hung my own golden slipper round your neck. Sing, I tell you, sing." But the bird stood silent. There was nobody to wind it up, so of course it could not go. Death continued to fix the great empty sockets of his eyes upon him, and all was silent, so terribly silent. Suddenly, close to the window, there was a burst of lovely song. It was the living nightingale, perched on a branch outside. It had heard the emperor's need and had come to bring comfort and hope to him. As it sang, the faces round became fainter and fainter, and the blood coursed with fresh vigor in the emperor's veins and through his feeble limbs. Even Death himself listened to the song and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on. Yes, if you give me the glorious golden sword. Yes, if you give me the imperial banner. Yes, if you give me the emperor's crown." And Death gave back each of these treasures for a song, and the nightingale went on singing. It sang about the quiet churchyard, when the roses bloom, when the elder-flower scents the air, and where the fresh grass is ever moistened anew by the tears of the mourner. This song brought to Death a longing for his own garden, and like a gray mist, he passed out of the window. Thanks, said the emperor. You heavenly little bird, I know. I banished you from my kingdom, and yet you have charmed the evil visions away from my bed by your song, and even death away from my heart. How can I ever repay you? You have rewarded me, said the nightingale. I brought the tears to your eyes the very first time I ever sang to you, and I shall never forget it. Those are the jewels which gladden the heart of a singer. But sleep now and wake up fresh and strong. I will sing to you. Then it sang again, and the emperor fell into a sweet, refreshing sleep. The sun shone in at his window when he was woke, refreshed and well. None of his attendants had yet come back to him, for they thought he was dead. But the nightingale still sat there singing. You must always stay with me, said the emperor. You shall only sing when you like, and I will break the artificial bird into 1,000 pieces. Don't do that, said the nightingale. It did all the good it could. Keep it as you have always done. I can't build my nest and live in this palace, but let me come whenever I like, and I will sit on the branch in the evening and sing to you. I will sing to cheer you and to make you thoughtful too. I will sing to you of the happy ones and of those that suffered too. I will sing about the good and the evil, which are kept hidden from you. The little singing bird flies far and wide, to the poor fisherman and the peasant's home, to the numbers who are far from you and your court. I love your heart more than your crown, and yet there is an odor of sanctity round the crown too. I will come, and I will sing to you, but you must promise me one thing. Welcome, welcome. Hi, Bunny. Everything. Oh, just a minute. A little tea break then. Sorry. Everything said the emperor, who stood there in his imperial robes, which he had just put on, and he held the sword heavy with gold upon his heart. One thing I ask you. Tell no one that you have a little bird who tells you everything. It will be better so. Then the nightingale flew away. The attendants came in to see after the dead emperor, and there he stood, bidding them good morning. And that is the end of The Nightingale. Sorry, that was a little bit shorter than I thought. But I hope that you enjoyed that reading. I really like that story a lot. And the visuals are always really nice too. Let's see. We have a short one here after. Okay, we'll read The Real Princess. This is all still by Hans Andersen. And then we'll go into The Garden of Paradise, which is a little bit longer, so that it should probably extend to our reading next week. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. All right. The Real Princess. There was once a prince, and he wanted a princess. But then she must be a real princess. He traveled right around the world to find one, but there was always something wrong. There were plenty of princesses, but whether they were real princesses, he had great difficulty in discovering. There was always something which was not quite right about them. So at last he had to come home again, and he was very sad because he wanted a real princess so badly. One evening, there was a terrible storm. It thundered and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Indeed, it was a fearful night. In the middle of the storm, somebody knocked at the town gate, and the old king himself went to open it. It was a princess who stood outside, but she was in a terrible state from the rain and the storm. The water streamed out of her hair and out of her shoes and out of her clothes. It ran at the top of her shoes and out of the heel. But she said that she was a real princess. Well, we shall soon see if that is true, thought the old queen, but she said nothing. She went into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off, and laid a pea on the bedside, or in the bedstead. Then she took 20 mattresses and piled them on top of the peas, and then 20 feather beds on top of the mattresses. This was where the princess was to sleep that night. In the morning, they asked how she had slept. "Oh, terribly badly," said the princess. "I had hardly closed my eyes the whole night. Heaven knows what was in the bed. I seemed to be laying upon some hard thing, and my whole body is black and blue in the morning. It is terrible." They saw at once that she must be a real princess when she had felt the pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. Nobody but a real princess could have such delicate skin. So the prince took her to be his wife, for now he was sure that he had found a real princess, and that the pea was put into the museum, where it may still be seen if no one has stolen it. Now, This is a true story. The end. And next, we're going to begin the Garden of Paradise. Our reading streams tend to be a little bit shorter, so we'll see how far we get into this story comparatively to, say, a gaming stream. All right. I hope everyone is still comfortable and cozy and enjoying the reading. And thank you for being here. Let us begin. The Garden of Paradise by Hans Andersen. There was once a king's son. Nobody had so many or such beautiful books as he had. He could read about everything which had ever happened in this world, and see it all represented in the most beautiful pictures. He could get information about every nation and every country. But as to where the Garden of Paradise was to be found, not a word could he discover. And this was the very thing he thought most about. His grandmother had told him when he was quite a little fellow and was about to begin his school life, that every flower in the Garden of Paradise was a delicious cake, and that the pistils were full of wine. In one flower, history was written, and another, geography or tables. You had only to eat the cake, and you knew the lesson. The more you ate, the more history, geography, and tables you knew. All this he believed then, but as he grew older and wiser and learnt more, he easily perceived that the delights of the Garden of Paradise must be far beyond all this. Oh, why did Eve take of the tree of knowledge? Why did Adam eat the forbidden fruit? If it had only been I, it would not have happened. Never would sin have entered the world. This is what he said then, and he still said it when he was 17. His thoughts were full of the Garden of Paradise. He walked into the wood one day. He was alone, for that was his greatest pleasure. Evening came on. Clouds drew up, and it rained as if the whole heaven had become a sluice from which the water poured in sheets. It was as dark as if the otherwise in the deepest well. Now he slipped on the wet grass, and then he fell on the bare stones, which jutted out the rocky ground. Everything was dripping, and at last the poor prince hadn't got a dry thread on him. He had to climb over huge rocks where the water oozed out of the thick moss. He was almost fainting. Just then, he heard a curious murmuring and saw in front of him a big lighted cave. A fire was burning in the middle, big enough to roast a stag, which was in fact being done. A splendid stag, with his huge antlers, was stuck on a split, being slowly turned round between the huge trunks of 2 fir trees. An oldish woman, tall and strong enough to be a man dressed up, sat by the fire, throwing on logs from time to time. "Come in, by all means," she said. "Sit down by the fire so that your clothes may dry." "There is a shocking drought here," said the prince. as he sat down on the ground. "It will be worse than this when my sons come home," said the woman. "You are in the cavern of the winds. My sons are the four winds of the world. Do you understand?" "Who are your sons?" asked the prince. "Well, that's not so easy to answer when the question is stupidly put," said the woman. "My sons do as they like. They are playing rounders now with the clouds up there in the great hall." And she pointed up into the sky. "Oh, indeed," said the prince. "You seem to speak very harshly, and you are not so gentle as the woman I generally see about me." "Oh, I dare say they have nothing else to do. I have to be harsh if I am to keep my boys under control. But I can do it, although they are stiff-necked lot. Do you see those 4 sacks hanging on the wall? They are just as frightened of them as you they are just as frightened of them as you used to be of the cane behind the looking glass. I can double the boys up, I can tell you. And then they have to go into the bag. We don't stand up ceremony. And there they have to stay. They can't get out to play their tricks till it suits me to let them. But here we have one of them. It was the north wind who came in with an icy blast. Great hailstones peppered about the floor and snowflakes drifted in. He was dressed in bearskin trousers and jacket, and he had a sealskin cap drawn over his ears. Long icicles were hanging from his beard, and one hailstone after another dropped down from the collar of his jacket. "Don't go straight to the fire," said the prince. "You might easily get chilblains." "Chilblains," said the north wind with a loud laugh. "Chilblains! They are my greatest delight. What sort of feeble creature are you? How did you get into the cave of the winds?" "He is my guest," said the old woman. "And if you are not pleased with that explanation, you may go into the bag. Now you know my opinion." This had its effect, and the north wind told them where he came from and where he had been for the last month. "I came from the Arctic Sea," he said. "I had been on Bering Island with the Russian walrus hunters. I sat at the helm and slept when they sailed for the North Cape, and when I woke now and then the stormy petrels were flying about my legs. They are queer birds. They give a brisk flap with their wings, and then they keep them scratched out, and then keep them stretched out and motionless, and even then they have speed enough." "Pray don't be too long-winded," said the mother of the winds. "So at last you got to Bering Island." "It's perfectly splendid. There you have a floor to dance upon, as flat as pancakes, half that snow with moss. There were bones of whales and polar bears laying about. They looked like the legs and arms of giants covered with green mound. One would think that the sun had never shone on them. I gave a little puff to the frog so that one could see the shed. It was a house built of wreckage and covered with the skins of whales. The flesh side was turned outward. It was all red and green. A living polar bear sat on the roof growling. I went to the shore and looked at the bird's nest, looked at the unfledged young ones screaming and gaping. Then I blew down thousands on their throats, and they learnt to shut their mouths. Lower down, the walruses were rolling about like monster maggots with pig heads and teeth a yard long. "You're a good storyteller, my boy," said the said his mother. It makes my mouth water to hear you. Then there was a hunt. The harpoons were plunged into the walrus's breast, and the streaming blood sprut out of them like fountains over the ice. Then I remembered my part of the game. I blew up and made my ships, the mountain-high icebergs, nip the boats. Phew. They were whistled, and how they screamed, but I whistled louder. They were obliged to throw the dead walrus's chest and ropes upon the ice. I took the snowflakes over them and let them drift southwards to taste the salt water. They will never come back to the Bering Island. Then you've been doing evil, said the mother of the winds. What good I did, the others may tell you, he said. But here we have my brother from the west. I like him best of all. He smells of the sea and brings a splendid cool breeze with him. Is that the little cipher? Asked the prince. Yes, certainly it is the cipher, but he is not so little as all that. He used to be a pretty boy once, but that's gone by. He looked like a wild man of the woods, but he had a padded hat on, so as not to come to any harm. He carried a mahogany club cut in the American mahogany forest. It could not be anything less than that. Where did you come from? Asked his mother. From the forest wilderness, he said, where the thorny creepers make a fence between every tree, where the water snake lies in the wet grass, and where human beings seem to be superfluous. What did you do there? I looked at the mighty river, saw where it dashed over the rocks and dust, and flew with the clouds to carry the rainbow. I saw the wild buffalo swimming in the river, but the stream carried him away. He floated with the wild duck, which soared into the sky at the rapids, but the buffalo was carried over with the water. I liked that, and blew a storm, so that the prival trees had to sail too, but they were whirled about like shavings. And you have done nothing else? Asked the old woman. I have been turning somersaults in the savannas, patting the wild horses, and shaking down coconuts. Oh yes, I have plenty of stories to tell, but one not need tell everything. You know that very well, old woman. And then he kissed his mother so heartily that she nearly fell backwards. He was indeed a wild boy. The south wind appeared now, in a turban and a flowing Boudin's cloak. It is fearfully cold in here, he said, throwing wood on the fire. It is easy to see that the north wind got here first. It is hot enough here to roast a polar bear, said the north wind. You are the polar bear yourself, said the south wind. Do you want to go into the bag? Asked the old woman. Sit down on the stone and tell us where you have been. In Africa, mother, he answered. I have been chasing the lion with the Hottentots and Kafiland. What grass there is on those plains, as green as an olive. Oh, the gnu was dancing about, and the ostriches ran races with me, but I am still the fastest. I went to the desert with its yellow sand. It looks like the bottom of the sea. I met a caravan. They were killing their last camel to get water to drink, but it wasn't much they got. The sun was blazing above, and the sand burning below, There was no limits to the outstretched desert. Then I burrowed into the fine loose sand and rolled it up in great volumes. That was a dance. You should have seen how despondently the dromedary stood, and the merchant drew his caftan over his head. He threw himself down before me as if I had been Allah, his God. Now they were buried, and there is a pyramid of sand over them all. When I blew it away, sometime the sun will bleach their bones, and then travelers will see the people have been there before. Otherwise, he would hardly believe it in the desert. Then you have only been doing harm, said the mother. Into the bag you go. And before he knew where he was, she had the south wind by the wrist and in the bag. It rolled about on the ground, but she sat down upon it, and then it had to be quiet. You sons are lively fellows, said the prince. Yes, indeed, she said. But I can master them. Here comes the fourth. It was the east wind, and he was dressed like a Chinaman. Oh, have you come from the quarter? Said the mother. I thought you had been in the garden of paradise. I am only going there tomorrow, said the east wind. It will be 100 years tomorrow since I had been there. I have just come from China, where I danced round the porcelain tower till all the bells jingled. The officials were flogged in the streets, the bamboo canes were broken over their shoulders, and they were all people ranging from the first to the 9th rank. They shrieked, many thanks, father and benefactor, but they didn't mean what they said. And I went on ringing the bells and singing, sing, song, soo. You're quite uproarious about it, said the old woman. It's a good thing you are going to the Garden of Paradise tomorrow. It always has a good effect on your behavior. Mind you drink deep of the well of wisdom, and bring a little bottle home to me. That I will, said the east wind. But why have you put my brother from the south into the bag? Out with him. He must tell me about the phoenix. The princess always wants to hear about the bird when I call every 100 years. Open the bag. Then you'll be my sweetest mother, and I'll give you 2 pockets full of tea as green and fresh as when I picked it. Well, for the sake of the tea, because you are my darling, I will open my bag. She did open it, and the south wind crept out, but he is quite crestfallen because of the strange prince had seen his disgrace. Here is a palm leaf for the princess, said the south wind. The old phoenix, the only one in the world, gave it to me. He has scratched his whole story on it with his bill for the 100 years of his life, and she can read it for herself. I saw how the phoenix set fire to his nest himself and sat on it while it burnt, like the widow of Hindu. Oh, how the dry branches crackled, how it smoked, and what a smell there was. At last it all burst into flame. The old bird was burnt to ashes, but his egg lay glowing in the fire. It broke with a loud bang, and the young one flew out. Now it rules over all the birds, and it is the only phoenix in the world. He bit a hole in the leaf I gave you. That is his greeting to the princess. Let us have something to eat now, said the mother of the winds. And they all sat down to eat the roast stag, and the prince sat by the side of the east wind, so they soon became good friends. I say, said the prince, just tell me who is this princess, and where is the garden of paradise? Oh, how, said the east wind. If that is where you want to go, you must fly with me tomorrow. But I may as well tell you that no human being has been there since Adam and Eve's time. You know all about them, I suppose, from your Bible stories. Of course, said the prince. When they were driven away, the Garden of Eden sank into the ground, but it kept its warm sunshine, its mild air, and all its charm. The queen of the fairies lives there, the island of bliss, where death never enters, and where living is a delight, is there. Get on my back tomorrow, and I will take you with me. I think I can manage it, but you mustn't talk now. I want to go to sleep. When the prince woke up in the early morning, he was not a little surprised to find that he was already high above the clouds. He was sitting on the back of the east wind, who was holding him carefully. They were so high up that the woods and fields, rivers and lakes looked like a large colored map. Good morning, said the east wind. You may as well sleep a little longer, for there is not much to be seen in this flat country below us, unless you want to count the churches. They look like chalk dots on the green board. He called the fields and meadows the green board. It was very rude of me to leave without saying goodbye to your mother and brothers, said the prince. One is excused when one is asleep, said the east wind, and they flew on faster than ever. You could mark their flight by the rustle of the trees as they passed over the woods, and whenever they crossed a lake or the seas, the waves rose, and great ships dipped low down in the water, like floating swans. Towards evening, the large towns were amusing as it grew dark, with all their lights twinkling now here, now there, just as when one burns a piece of paper and sees all the little sparks like children coming home from school. The prince clapped his hands, but the east wind told him he had better leave off and hold tight, or he might fall and find himself hanging on to a church steeple. The eagle in the front forest flew swiftly, but the east wind flew more swiftly still. The Cossack, on his little horse, sped fast over the plains, but the prince sped faster still. Now you can see the Himalayas, said the east wind. They are the highest mountains in Asia. We shall soon reach the garden of paradise. They took a more southerly direction, and the air became scented with spices and flowers. Figs and pomegranates grew wild, and the wild vines were covered with blue and green grapes. They both descended here and stretched themselves on the soft grass, where the flowers nodded to the wind, as much as to say, "Welcome back." Are we in the Garden of Paradise now? Asked the prince. Soon be there. I'm sorry. No, certainly not, answered the east wind, but we shall soon be there. Do you see the wall of rock and the great caravan where the wild vines hang like a big curtain? We have to go through there. Wrap yourself up in your cloak. The sun is burning here, but a step further on is icy cold. The bird which flies past the caravan has one wing out here in the heat of summer, and the other is there in the cold of winter. So that is the way of the Garden of Paradise, said the prince. Now they entered the caravan. Oh, how icily cold it was! But it did not last. The east wind spread its wings, and they shone like the brightest flame. But what a cave it was! Large blocks of stone, from which the water dripped, hung over them in the most extraordinary shapes. At one moment, it was so low and narrow that they had to crawl on hands and knees. The next, it was as wide and lofty as if they were in the open air. It looked like a chapel of the dead, with mute organ pipes and petrified banners. We seem to be journeying along death's road to the Garden of Paradise, said the prince. But the east wind never answered a word. He only pointed before them, where a beautiful blue light was shining. The blocks of stone above them grew dimmer and dimmer, and at last they became as transparent as a white cloud in the moonshine. The air was so deliciously soft, as fresh as on the mountain tops, and as scented as down among the roses in the valley. A river ran there as clear as the air itself, and the fish in it were like gold and silver. Purple eels, which gave out blue sparks with every curve, gamboled about in the water, and the broad leaves on the water lilies were tinged with the hue of the rainbow, while the flower itself was like a fiery orange flame, nourished by the water, just as oil keeps a lamp constantly burning. A firm bridge of marble, as delicately and skillfully carved as if it were lace and gold beads, led over the water to the island of bliss, where the Garden of Paradise bloomed. The east wind took the prince in his arms and bore him over. The flowers and leaves there sang all the beautiful old songs of his childhood, but sang them more wonderfully than any human voice could ever sing them. Were these palm trees or giant water plants growing here? The prince had never seen such a rich and mighty tree. The most wonderful climbing plants hung in wreaths, such as are only to be found pictured in gold and colors on the margins of old books of the saints, or entwined among their initial letters. It was the most extraordinary combination of birds, flowers, and scrolls. Close by on the grass stood a flock of peacocks with their brilliant tails outspread. Yes, indeed, it seemed so, but when the prince touched them, he saw that they were not birds, but plants. They were big dock leaves which shone like peacock tails. Lions and tigers sprang like agile cats among the green hedges, which were scented with the blossom of the olive, and the lion and the tiger were tame. The wild dove, glistening like a pearl, beat the lion's mane with its with his wings, and the antelope, otherwise so shy, stood by nodding, just as if he wanted to join the game. The fairy of the garden now advanced to meet them. Her garment shone like the sun, and her face beamed like that of a happy mother rejoicing over her child. She was young and very beautiful, and was surrounded by a band of lovely girls, each with a gleaming star in her hair. When the east wind gave her the inscribed leaf from the phoenix, her eyes sparkled with delight. She took the prince's hand and led him into her palace, where the walls were the color of the brightest tulips in the sunlight. The ceiling was one great shining flower, and the longer one gazed into it, into the deep the calyx seemed to be. The prince went to the window, and looking through one of the panes, saw the tree of knowledge, with the serpent and Adam and Eve standing by. "Are they not driven out?" he asked, and the fairy smiled, and explained that time had burned a picture into each pane, but not of the kind one usually sees. They were alive. The leaves on the trees moved, and people came and went like the reflections in a mirror. Then he looked through another pane, and he saw Jacob's dream, with the ladder going straight up into heaven, and angels with great wings were fluttering up and down. All that had ever happened in this world lived and moved on these window panes. Only time could imprint such wonderful pictures. The fairy smiled and led him into a large, lofty room, the walls of which were like transparent paintings of faces, one more beautiful than the other. These were millions of the blessed who smiled and sang, and all their songs melted into one perfect melody. The highest ones were so tiny that they seemed smaller than the very smallest rosebud, no bigger than a pinpoint in a drawing. In the middle of the room stood a large tree with handsome drooping branches, golden apples large and small, hung like oranges among its green leaves. It was the tree of knowledge, of whose fruit Adam and Eve had eaten. From every leaf hung a shining red drop of dew. It was as if the tree wept tears of blood. "Now let us get into the boat," said the fairy. "We shall find refreshments on the swelling waters. The boat rocks, but it does not move from the spot. All the countries of the world will pass before our eyes." It was a curious sight to see the whole coast move. Here came lofty snow-clad Alps, with their clouds and dark fir trees. The horn echoed sadly among them, and the shepherd yodeled sweetly into the valleys. Then banyan trees went their long drooping branches over the boat. Black swans floated on the water, and the strangest animals and flowers appeared on the shore. This was the New Holland, the fifth portion of the world, which glid past them with a view of its blue mountains. They heard the song of the priest and saw the dances of the savages to the sound of drums and pipes of bone. The pyramids of Egypt reaching to the clouds, with fallen columns and sphinxes half buried in sand, next sailed past them. Then came the aurora borealis, blazing over the peaks of the north. They were fireworks which could not be imitated. The prince was so happy, and he saw 100 times more than we have ever described. I think we'll do about another half hour, but let us take a small break as I forgot to stop at our hour mark. I will be back momentarily, and please stay comfortable and cozy. Let us continue. Then came the aurora borealis, blazing over the peak of the north. They were fireworks which cannot be imitated. The prince was so happy, and he saw 100 times more than we have described. Can I stay here always? He asked. That depends upon yourself, answered the fairy. If you do not, like Adam, allow yourself to be tempted to do what is forbidden, you can stay here always. I will not touch the apples on the tree of knowledge, said the prince. There are thousands of other fruits here as beautiful. Test yourself, and if you are not strong enough, go back with the east wind who brought you. He is going away now, and will not come back for 100 years. The time will fly in this place like 100 hours, but that is a long time for temptation and sin. Every evening, when I leave you, I must say, come with me, and I must beckon to you, but stay behind. Do not come with me, for with every step you take, your longing will grow stronger. You will reach the hall where grows the tree of knowledge. I will sleep beneath its fragrant, drooping branches. You will bend over me, and I must smile. And if you press a kiss upon my lips, paradise will sink deeper down into the earth, and it will be lost to you. The sharp winds of the wilderness will whistle around you, and the cold rain will drop from your hair. Sorrow and labor will be your lot. I will remain here, said the prince. And the east wind kissed him on the mouth and said, be strong. Then we shall meet again in 100 years. Farewell, farewell, farewell. And then the east wind spread his great wings. They shone like poppies at the harvest time, or the north lights in a cold winter. Goodbye, goodbye, whispered the flowers. Storks and pelicans flew in a line like waving ribbons, conducting him to the boundaries of the garden. Now we begin our dance, said the fairy. At the end, when I dance with you, as the sun goes down, you will see me beckoning to you and cry, come with me, but do not come. I have to repeat it every night for 100 years. Welcome, welcome. Hello, hello. Don't don't mind that message. We have a constraint that you must watch for 10 minutes before commenting, but I appreciate your presence and welcome. I have to repeat it every night for 100 years. Every time you resist, you will grow stronger, and at last you will not even think of following. Tonight is the first time. Remember my warning. Oh. And the fairy led him into a large hall of white transparent lilies. The yellow stamens in each formed a little golden harp, which echoed the sound of strings and flutes. Lovely girls, slender and lissom, dressed in floating gauze, which revealed their exquisite limbs, glid in the dance and sang the joy of living, that they would never die, and that the garden of paradise would bloom forever. The sun went down, and the sky was bathed in golden light, which gave the lilies the effect of roses, and the prince drank of the foaming wine handed to him by the maidens. He felt such joy as he had never known before. He saw the background of the hall opening, where the tree of knowledge stood, and a radiance which blinded him. The song proceeding from it was soft and lovely, like his mother's voice, and she seemed to say, "My child, my beloved child." Then the fairy beckoned to him and said so tenderly, "Come with me," that he rushed towards her, forgetting his promise, forgetting everything on the very first evening that she smiled and beckoned to him. The fragrance and the scented air around grew stronger. The harps sounded sweeter than ever, and it seemed as if the millions of smiling heads in the hall where the tree grew nodded and sang, "One must know everything. Man is Lord of the earth." They were no longer tears of blood which fell from the tree. It seemed to him that they were red shining stars. Come with me," spoke those trembling tones, and at every step the prince's cheeks burnt hotter and hotter, and his blood coursed more rapidly. "I must go," he said. "It is no sin. I must see her asleep. Nothing will be lost if I do not kiss her, and that I will not do. My will is strong." The fairy dropped her shimmering garment, drew back the branches, and a moment after was hidden within their depths. "I have not sinned yet," said the prince, "nor will I." Then he drew back the branches. There she lay asleep already, beautiful as only the fairy in the garden of paradise can be. She smiled in her dreams. He bent over her and saw the tears welling up under her eyelashes. "Do you weep for me?" he whispered. Weep not, beautiful maiden. I only now understand the full bliss of paradise. It surges my blood and through my thoughts. I feel the strength of the angels and of everlasting life in my mortal limbs. If it were to be everlasting night to me, a moment like this were worth it." And he kissed away the tears from her eyes. His mouth touched hers. Then came a sound like thunder, louder and more awful than any he had ever heard before. And everything around collapsed. The beautiful fairy, the flowery paradise sank deeper and deeper. The prince saw it sink into the darkness of night. It shone far off like a little tiny twinkling star. The chill of death crept over his limbs. He closed his eyes and lay as long if dead. The cold rain fell on his face, and the sharp wind blew around his head, and at last his memory came back. What have I done? He sighed. I have sinned like Adam, sinned so heavily that paradise has sunk low beneath the earth. And he opened his eyes. He could still see the star, the faraway star, which twinkled like paradise. It was the morning star in the sky. He got up and found himself in the wood near the cave of the winds, and the mother of the winds sat by his side. She looked angry and raised her head. So soon as the first evening, she said, I thought as much. If you were my boy, you should go into the bag. Ah, He shall soon go there, said Death. He was a strong he was a strong old man, with a scythe in his hand and great black wings. He shall be laid in a coffin, but not now. I only mark him, and then leave him for a time to wander about on the earth, to expiate his sins, and to grow better. I will come sometime, when he least expects me. I shall come back, lay him in a black coffin, put it on his head, and fly to the skies, or put it on my head, and fly to the skies. The garden of paradise blooms there too, and if he is good and holy, he shall enter into it. But if his thoughts are wicked, and his heart still full of sin, he will sink deeper in his coffin. Then paradise sank, and I shall only go once in every 1,000 years to see if he is to sink deeper or to rise to the stars, the twinkling stars up there. The end. I think that is where we will stop today, my sweet dreamers. I do hope that you enjoyed that short collection of readings from Hans Andersen. I feel like those are very sweet for bedtime. And I hope that if you are at the sound of my voice, I hope wherever you are in the world that your dreams are so very sweet, and that you wake tomorrow feeling refreshed with a mind that is clear and a heart motivated to conquer the day ahead of you. We appreciate each and every one of you so very much. And here is your goodnight kiss for the evening. Mwah! On your sweet, gentle foreheads. And we will see you all back here on Friday. I have something very special to share with you all. And we'll get back into Minds Beneath Us. And then next week we'll see what our schedule will be. But for now, good night, sweet dreams. I tend to forget our evening message is Oyasumira. If you ever feel like typing in the chat, this is how we say goodnight here. But until then, sweet dreams, I bid you adieu. Good night, my sweet.